First of all, before we go to the Inter-Island ferries, I want to the email that I got yesterday from your boss, Jordan Williams, was about this extraordinary story to do with Waka Kotahi, now known as the New Zealand Transport Agency. Well, depends which media outlet you go to. That they bought a $5.2 million app, I assume for your phone or for your electronic device, but they didn't work out that if it was legal to use it. Can you explain that?
So it's one of those stories that on the face of it sounds sensible enough, right? So the New Zealand Transport Agency had spent over 2 years, they'd spent $5.2 million building this app basically to act as a digital driver's license. So, it would theoretically save you the faff of having to carry around a physical license and all the red tape that comes with that. But, being
so I could put my license on my phone. Is that right?
Well, yeah, in theory. But, being the permanent skeptics that we are, one of our researchers had to look into this to see if it was even legal to use. First of all, no, it isn't. You can't use this app as a digital license. And second of all, the NZTA hadn't even bothered to check, right? This is just absolute common sense to everyone out there listening. That if you're going to spend a couple of $1 million building an app, you'd check you could use it. But apparently to the bureaucrats in Wellington, it didn't even cross their minds.
So we've paid $5 million for a project that won't work and no one's going to be held accountable. Is that right?
That's about the sum of it. In theory, it could work if there was a law change, if it went through Parliament and it was legislated that this app could be used. But the law as it stands is that it can't be used and it wasn't checked beforehand. It's, as I say, absolute common sense that you'd get the law in place beforehand and you'd get this sorted, but it just didn't even cross the bureaucrats' minds.
No, that would be too much lateral thinking, wouldn't it? And they could only think one step in front of the other. It's amazing. It's got I've seen it get no media coverage at all now, apart from the platform and as a result of your investigation. Are the media not interested in stories of public sector incompetence? They're more interested in stories of public sector being laid off?
I think half the problem, to be honest with you, is that there are just so many stories of public sector incompetence that people just get used to it. But you've got to keep highlighting these things. You've got to keep drawing attention to the fact that these bureaucrats are just doing a horrific job at valuing taxpayers' money.
Yeah, well, so true. And life, it would appear too, in connection with Oranga Tamariki this morning. All right, which leads me to this next one, talking about taxpayers' dollars being basically pissed down, whatever analogy you like to use. And this is the government ownership of the Interislander. You've got a petition now to end the government ownership of the Interislander. I guess why? Because of the incompetence of the people who are running it.
Yeah, exactly. The stories over the last couple of weeks should be all the proof anyone needs that the government is just awful at operating ferries. They can't do it. Not only can they not do it cost effectively, at the moment it's seeming like they can't do it at all. There are commercial operators doing the same thing absolutely fine, because they know if they don't invest in their maintenance and their replacement regularly, and they don't make the hard financial decisions needed to do that, then their business suffers. Whereas KiwiRail now, if they throw their hands up, they're going to get a couple of billion bunged their way from the taxpayer.
Yes, and that's the extraordinary thing about this, is that there is an inter-island ferry service run by Bluebridge. The question I would have of you is, does it complement or compete with KiwiRail's inter-island ferries? It would seem to complement, wouldn't it, rather than compete directly?
Well, no, I think it's fair to say that they are competition, and we would be of the view that the more companies offering this service, the better. The more competition, the more efficient a service you're going to get. But the fact is, when you've got one of the big players, in fact, the major player in the Cook Strait crossings, implicitly backed up by the taxpayer, no one else can afford to compete.
It's an unfair competition.
A good job, exactly. Yeah, it screws the scrum.
Now, ministers are yet to announce their new plan to replace KiwiRail's fleet. I guess you're trying to get in before they, in actual fact, make that decision by suggesting we'll get out entirely. How has that particular view gone down with the government that you've been, or MPs or ministers you've been talking to?
There's work to do, which is why we're campaigning on this and we're trying to build up some public support. I think there's a danger that they're going to flip-flop on this. I was really happy to see a couple of months ago that the government came out and kiboshed these plans to fund what had gone from 750 million to about 3.5 billion to replace the ferries. They'd put a stop to that. There's a question of whether they're going to cave into some pressure from the media now. But, as long as we keep the pressure up and we let them know that people want to see value for money from KiwiRail, then I think we can get a win on this one.
$3 billion is an awful lot of money to spend on something that we could be spending on something else, yeah?
Well, this is the point, isn't it? And when you think that only about a fifth of that is actually getting the ferries, the rest of it's replacing the terminals and the infrastructure. It's just such an ill-thought-out plan. Now, $3 billion could do so much good if it was back in people's pockets who are suffering through this cost of living crisis. But instead it's being chucked at KiwiRail, who are failing time and again to show bang for buck for taxpayers' money.
KiwiRail seem to have had a view that they've got an open checkbook. They knew they had problems. They kept on going initially to Grant Robertson, then Minister of Finance. They went to this government as well. And didn't see a problem with asking for more and more money as the cost escalated of the options that they were seeking, particularly the mega ferries with all the associated infrastructure. What does it tell you about the corporate board and the directors that governments are appointing to these kind of enterprises?
I think it's fair to lay a fair chunk of this blame on the board and the management, but to me, the real issue is just the business model itself. It's, as we talked about, it's set up so that they can always rely on these taxpayer bungs if things go wrong. When things start going wrong, like happened with the ferry that grounded itself, then you get this huge media storm and governments always end up caving. Now, if you're relying on things going wrong to get your funding, clearly that's not a business model that works. No, fair point. And so in this particular case, though, the Aratiri managed to beach itself and not do itself too much damage, it would appear. Is that an example, though, of a ferry that's past its use-by date, or just considering it had been recently serviced, somebody didn't do their job properly? Yeah, look, there's every chance that these ferries need replacing. As I say, but of the $3 billion, only about 20% of that is actually replacing the ferries. So if KiwiRail were to buy some replacements, buy some cheaper ones that actually work with the existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
Now, I think the argument that we need these enormous mega ferries falls somewhat flat when you hear that the ferry that ran aground only had 8 passengers on it. But two, if you sell off the Interislander now, while it's still worth something, and let a commercial board make those decisions in the commercial interest of the company, then of course they'll end up replacing them.